Welcome to the Pixel Retentive Podcast, where we, a business owner and an artist, discuss the business of art and the art of business. Hey friends, I'm Carl, founder of Epic Made.
And I'm Ross, creative director at Epic Made, and we're the hosts of the Pixel Retentive Podcast, where we share our thoughts on creativity, art, and business. Past guests include Marcy Selsberg of Blah Blah Blah, Joe Weaver of OceanT.com, and Rebecca Blake of the Graphic Artists Guild.
We are forever grateful for the sponsors of our podcast. As always, this episode is brought to you by the creative gurus at Epic Made. Epic Made is a collaborative of artists and animators who help brands tell powerful and engaging stories. We've demonstrated our expertise in visual storytelling, fantasy pop culture, and detailed world building in collaboration with some of the biggest names in the entertainment space, including Sci-Fi, Nickelodeon, and TNT. Visit getepicmade.com and let's collaborate on your next creative campaign.
One day you'll figure out how to say that right. With us today, we have Gage Mitchell. Gage sees everything as a design challenge, whether it's designing for your business, your life, or your community. He's the founder of Modern Species and Evolve CPG, where he helps better for the world brands grow through purpose-driven strategy, design, and community. Welcome, Gage.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course, man. Appreciate you jumping into this combo with us. And you and I have been homies now for a couple of years. We met, with AIGA and doing some of that stuff pre-pandemic life when we used to travel around and go to more in-person AIGA events. Hopefully those will be coming back eventually. But so before we jump into the meat of today's subject, we have a couple little quick hitters so the audience can get to know you. So first things first, how long have you been doing this and what brought you to the industry?
There's so many things that I do that it's hard to put a time stamp on any of them. But I guess I've been practicing design professionally for about 20 years. But I've done it in so many different forms. The current form I'm doing it in through Modern Species, we just passed our 14-year anniversary. So a little over 14 years of doing the better for the world brands kind of thing.
Thank you for your service to the community.
Thank you.
Of course. Yeah.
Cool. Next one. What's top of mind in your industry right now? So what's deep on your podcast that you guys find you're bringing up all the time? I assume that's the same question.
A lot of the space I work in is better for the world, mostly product brands. So a lot of food and beverage brands, for example, that are organic, regenerative, fair trade, upcycled, etc. So a lot of what's on people's minds in that industry right now is the economy, investors kind of pulling back and getting a little scared, inflation, continued supply chain issues, and just kind of like the survival of the fittest or the survival of the leanest or whatever at the moment, just who can survive the longest while kind of constantly bleeding is kind of the name of the game at the moment. But I think there's also a lot of amazing potential and excitement in the space too, with when you have to kind of clear the clutter and focus on what matters. I think there's a lot of people out there really dialing their businesses in a bit tighter to rely less on venture capital money coming in where you can just blow money and lose money on all your initiatives. People are just starting to tighten and focus more on profitability and focusing on what matters. So in some ways, I kind of like it because I feel like that's the way business should be in the first place.
It's a bit more focused.
I love the mindset there, right? Like it's like that in everything, right? There's with this great negative side, it also has, but hey, on the tail end, it also does these things, which is very positive. So, mindset there is really important to have the whole perspective in mind because, it's easy to be a victim and get defeated real quickly if you're not open-minded about things. So,
yeah, if you look into a lot of people's backstory that you might look up to, there's probably an event or some circumstances or something that were probably overwhelmingly negative or difficult that pushed them into the path that they're on now, where they're doing amazing things for the world and you're looking up to them, right? It's diamonds 100% under pressure. Without that pressure, you're just a lump of coal sometimes, right?
Yeah.
When the economy shifts or when your business shifts or when the world shifts or you have health problems or something like that, you're kind of forced to actually think about what matters to you and kind of shift your perspective. And I think those moments are what creates just amazing lives and amazing people. I wish we could get there without that pressure, but that pressure is often needed.
Yeah, pain brings about innovation and inspiration, without a doubt. So that is the nature of humanity, I feel.
Yeah, it's definitely something that Carl and I have talked about a lot, that the whole pressure to create a diamond sort of situation where you're often not able to realize what you're capable of without being pushed to kind of pursue it. Like there's a rule in storytelling where the character that you, like your main character or really any character, the best way to write them is always to try to have them use the least amount of energy possible, because that's how humans operate. And then their situation forces them to change because they have no choice but to expend more energy or but to change their situation or to press forward, right?
Yeah. Let's get on the next level. It's like DBZ. Every episode somebody's coming to like Super Saiyan 8. 7 was the only thing possible. Like, anyways, I love it. No, that's so true, man. All right, so last on the quick hitter, and then we'll get into the meat potatoes of today's episode. Tell us about the project you're most proud of right now, or just in general.
Wow. That's a tough one. So many projects, but one I've been thinking about lately, just from this kind of like ripple effect kind of standpoint, is the Upcycled Food Association. They're this newer group that was getting launched from a collective of just people in the industry who were all working on solving this food waste problem. And one of the best solutions for it is to upcycle what would have been waste and turn it into something of value. So the industry came together, decided we need common language, we need a common standard. And that's around the time that we got to work with them, help them update or create a brand for the association, but also create certification marks.
Ooh.
So that when you're out there in the world shopping and you want to shop for climate change, that's just one of the marks you can look for that says, hey, this product is doing something good for the world. It's helping fight food waste, which is reducing climate change.
So I love that.
One thing that I love about that is often when I'm designing for our individual clients, our work might be on, thousands or millions of packages across the world, right? But by designing for us an association or a certification, now that project or that design, those marks will be on, hundreds of different brands across hundreds of millions of products, and just have like a huge ripple effect out into the world. And they've just been growing super fast and getting tons of attention from tiny businesses all the way up to giant multinational corporations, all wanting to get in on this movement, partly because it just makes sense, right? Instead of wasting stuff that was probably still good just because you were maybe being a little lazy or overlooking it, you can recapture that stuff, create more value for your company while also making a change for the better for the world. So it just makes sense. It's pulling lots of people in, getting a lot of momentum. And it's just fun to just stumble across those certification marks that we worked on out in the world on stuff we had no idea existed, right? So it's one thing you worked on a project and it exists and you wait and find it in the supermarket. It's another thing when you just stumble across something that ends up using your work that you didn't know was going to use your work. So I think that's one example recently of just some kind of fun opportunity to make an impact on the world.
I love that. And thanks for sharing that, man. All right, well, I'm pass it to Ross.
It's fantastic. It must be a different feeling than really anything that anything that we've experienced, Carl, because like most of the stuff that we designed and Epic made, we're hyper aware of how it's being used and how it's
right.
Not where controlling the use almost like
right, yeah,
like delivering the final asset and saying don't mess with this maybe.
And not in the way that Gage isn't aware of how it's being used because it's being used as intended, but just that he doesn't know like who's going to end up with the end product, and then he can just kind of stumble across it. That must be a really rewarding feeling.
Yeah. Like when we make an ad for Nickelodeon, we know it's going to be on their Twitter.
Right. Yeah. We know where it's going to be.
Probably, and that's it, right? It's not going to like be on somebody's package in the store of some place randomly, which is just fun. You know, I love that.
Yeah. Absolutely. So in this episode of Pixel Retentive, we are going to be discussing the art of leadership and how to position yourself as a leader within your industry, the world, based on how Gage is tackling things. And I just feel like all three of us are pretty well qualified to kind of discuss our experiences with that and maybe give some advice to people who want to be a bit more influential in their space. I feel like there's probably a lot of common ground. Like it's not exactly industry specific
Advice. Yeah.
advice. Is that fair to say, Gage?
Yeah, I imagine. I mean, each industry probably has some little nuances or quirks, but I think leadership is pretty common across all walks of life, whether you're just a leader in your community, leader in your household, leading yourself, leading your friend group, leading your business, leading within an industry. I think there's a lot of commonality across that. Just maybe some of the tactics, individual bits of advice might be industry specific. Like it takes a little bit different skill set probably to lead a team of creatives than leading a team of accountants, right? Like there's different management skills and stuff you might need there. But
I was going to say it's like herding cats versus I don't know. I feel like any comparison I make to accountants is probably not going to be
Yeah.
well. So I'm gonna hold my tongue on that one. But
People follow directions real clearly.
but no. What does being a leader mean to you, Gage? I'm going to ask this question of Carl too, but I'm interested to hear your response.
Sure, big question. Like I wasn't coming fully prepared to answer that question, but I'll just off the top of my head, I guess being a leader means just kind of like standing up for something you care about and showing up and continuing to show up and then doing what you can to support others along the way and just doing what you say you're going to do. But I guess it's just, if we're looking at the word literally, like leader means you're out in front of the pack and there's other people that will hopefully kind of follow. I guess it means to some degree, somebody who's willing to stick their neck out, so to speak, and walk out on that limb, try something different, raise their hand, be the first person to raise the hand in the meeting, be the first person to ask a question, just anything you can do to try to help set the tone or find the path, find the way for other people who are maybe a little bit more nervous, anxious by default, and they're a little bit too afraid to take that first step. I think a leader is often somebody who's willing to take that step, show everyone else it's safe, and maybe come back with some advice on how to do it and support them on their journey. But anyways, it's just about supporting brands, supporting other people.
Carl, what do you think?
I love that. No, I resonate with all of that, Gage, for sure. And Gage and I both met being leaders in the design space at AIGA. So I say, just building on that, I think it's, you're a defender and a guide, right? And you have probably a higher risk tolerance than everyone else behind you. So it's almost like we're wired in a way where I feel like it's our obligation to be leaders because we do have that risk tolerance and feel at least competent in our beliefs and have had the introspection to say, you know what, I got to go over here and stand up for this thing, whatever that is. That might be, this idea that your business is founded on. That might be like some principle of way of doing things, but you can't be a leader without any foundational like things that you believe in, right? You got to plant your flag firmly on something and say, this is what I believe. And if you believe this, we're over here holding this party down. So whatever that looks like in manifestation. So, and I love it. That's why Gage and I get along, because I saw him leading and doing some crazy cool stuff. I was like, I got to know this guy. Like, and here we are. Now we're friends, right? We've helped each other out, make connections for each other. And it's a beautiful thing. That's what it's community building, right? And I think that I have always, whenever someone asks me about leader, I instantly have this visual in my head that I saw someone put up that was like, it was like 4 people dragging this huge block to like build a pyramid. It's very like Egyptian themed, right? And they got this rope And on top of this big ass block is a dude in a throne with a whip. And it's like boss, right? That's the guy. He's the boss, right? And then the same illustration, same dudes with a rope pulling their hardest. And the leader illustration, the leader's in front of the three dudes with his own rope, pulling harder in the front. Like, we're going this way and there's no extra weight on top, like from the boss. And I love that illustration because that's the way I've always run. Like, and I tell, Ross and the whole team this way, like, I'm not more important than anybody here. And I think that's a huge thing for good leadership. Like, a good leader has the ego is about the movement and the idea and the principles and not about themselves. It's about getting behind an idea versus getting behind elevating themselves.
So it's interesting. It's interesting that you guys, well, not only obviously are you guys aligned somewhat on this definition, but I feel like there's a bit of I guess I'll call it a myth or an understanding that you guys both left out, that you need an exorbitant amount of knowledge to lead a community. But you guys both focus significantly on courage, consistency, drive, empathy, things like that, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting that when I think most people think of a business leader, they think of someone who has all the answers, right? And I feel like, and that's always something that I feel like, Carl, you changed my perspective on that, right? Where it didn't.
He doesn't have any of the answers.
I know, and it's great. we're all the questions.
He was willing to find them with his team, right? And I think that you can be a successful leader if you have an exorbitant amount of knowledge in the field, and I'm sure that there is a boon to that to some degree, and depends on how you use that power. But it's interesting that neither one of you see that as a core tenet, when I think that that's a stereotypical vision for leaders in the business industry.
That's interesting that you say that. And I think when you say that, my mind goes to thought leadership. Sure.
Well, sure.
There's that specific style of leadership where you know so much about a thing or have a unique perspective on that thing, and you share that thought leadership with the world. For sure, that's a form of leadership, in that you're putting ideas out there for other people to process and maybe turn it into their own thoughts on that same thing, and maybe push it even further. So it's kind of like being willing to put your mind out there and say, here's some things that floating around in my brain, see what y'all can do with it, right? But I don't think it's a requirement of leadership. Like,
right. And even then, even what you're talking about goes back to kind of courage and consistency and the willingness to want to help other people. Right.
Right.
So, yeah, I just find that really interesting.
Yeah. I say it hadn't even dawned on me.
Yeah. That makes me think like there's probably different types of leaders, right? Like there's kind of like there's different types of intelligence. You got your street smarts and your book smarts and your emotional intelligence and all that other kind of stuff. I feel like for leadership, there's probably different styles or not styles. So that wouldn't be like, oh, I'm a coach or I'm a mentor or something, but like different types of leaders, right? Because there's like what you're talking about, thought leaders, people who are, really deep knowledge or really brilliant ideas on a subject, who are maybe writing books, have a podcast, blog, whatever, and they're just putting those thoughts out there. That person might not be a starter. Like that person might not have created the organization. That person might not be an entrepreneur. That person might not even manage anybody. They might just sit in a room and think all day, and other people hire them to do some stuff, right? So like they're a leader in one way, but not a leader in another way. And then there's the type of leader who maybe doesn't need to have any specific knowledge. They just need to be good with people and have kind of a vision or a belief, like Carl was talking about, that there's a better way. And they start talking about that better way, and they find the really smart people who know what they're talking about and who have a lot of that knowledge and experience. And they work with those people, and they just say, hey, let's take that knowledge and let's go over in this direction. Almost like a Steve Jobs. Like Steve Jobs didn't know crap about how to build a computer, He just thought there was probably a way that we could take this burgeoning technology, make it smaller, and get it into people's hands to do cool stuff with. And then he found the smart people that actually knew what they were doing to kind of build it, right? So there's that kind of leader as well. And I'm sure there's other types of leaders too, like a community leader who maybe their biggest asset is that they just care more than other people, and they're just there trying to support people. They might not have any specific knowledge. They might not even be that much more brave than anyone else. They just care more, and therefore they're the connector that everything kind of centers around. So maybe there's just like different flavors of leadership,
different like archetypes.
Yeah. There's certainly, yeah, without a doubt. And I just got out of an election cycle helping my wife with some state elections here. And yeah, there absolutely are leaders that just galvanize behind another leader, right? They're like a sub leader, right? Like, hey, we believe in this candidate, and I'm going to rally my whole neighborhood, and I'm going to be the leader of my micro community within this bigger community and tell people about this person. Like, let's get behind them and get out the vote and all that sort of stuff. So there's totally that's interesting. This is an interesting conversation, Fred.
Yeah. I wonder, therefore, if there are different types of leadership or whatever that.
I'm sure if we Google it,
is there a common thread? Yeah, is there like a common thread though? Is there like some, like if they're all made up of a different recipe of leadership capabilities, is there at least one or two things that is common across all those recipes?
Well, I feel like the concept of, I keep going back to the word courage.
That's where my mind is going too.
Yeah, I feel like that is a staple asset, a staple trait of a leader, no matter who you are, because no matter what, to be a leader, you're putting yourself in a position where there's a degree of risk. Like basically, no matter what you're doing, whether that's just speaking on the internet, whether that's leading a team, whether that's campaigning for some sort of other leader, like Carl was mentioning, there's a degree of risk involved in putting yourself out there and trying to make yourself sort of a target of like a spot. You're putting a spotlight on you to some degree.
Yeah, for sure.
Makes total sense.
I also think that empathy, or just the willingness to want to, if not help others, then change others, maybe. Like the willingness for, or the want for change outside of yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
Sometimes that's community change, right? Or that's industry change, or
It could be community change. It could be industry change. It could be change in the team morale inside of a company. It could be change in technology, right? Like, I feel like the want for change is forced upon you if you want to become a leader, or vice versa.
Yeah. It reminds me of an old saying my dad used to have, that you'll hear people talk about like, oh, well, someone just complains and complains and complains. And so he had this old analogy. It's like there's a dog, laying on a nail on the porch, and he's just whining and whining and whining. And the guy asked the dog owner, well, why doesn't he move? It was like, well, the nail doesn't hurt enough yet. So like once it hurts enough, then you actually get up and do some shit about it. Right. Like, so that's kind of an interesting thought there that I often come back to in my head. It's like,
I can't remember.
Go
ahead.
Oh, I was going to ramble more. Go ahead.
I can't remember where the quote was, who said it, or the exact words, but it was something similar. It said, like, people don't change until the pain of not changing becomes greater than the fear of making the change.
Yes. Yeah. That was a little more insightful. I like that. I think I'll replace my story.
It is a balance. And I think that goes back to the courage that we were talking about, right? Is the courage is being willing to embrace that fear. Like, unless you're a sociopath, there's probably no leader out there who isn't nervous, anxious a little bit to some degree of like, I don't know if this is going to work well. I could fall off this cliff. I could completely fail. Like, I could get blasted on the internet by putting this thought out there. There's probably a little bit of that in the back of your mind, but you do it anyway. Yeah. And that's the courage part. And that's maybe that one of the core talents, like you're saying, is maybe before it's too painful, you're willing to go ahead and give it anyway, right?
Yeah, because once you've hit a threshold of the fear has, or like the need to change is now outweighed the fear, you're likely in an average pool, right? You're likely in a pool with an enormous amount of other people who are also waiting for that moment, right? And so the courage to do it sooner, at risk of vitriol from the community, at risk of fear of, of just fucking up or failing,
whatever that manifests as,
yeah. Or also imposter syndrome is like a really big in like infection in leaders, right? Where because they're putting themselves first, they're putting themselves out first. You're never really sure what you're saying is right.
Yeah.
Right. You're never 100% certain that that your advice or that your direction or that what you believe in is the way that you should be guiding people. Right. And so you kind of, there's a level of faith and, courage and all this stuff that kind of goes back into it that you have to fight as a leader.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
I navigate that by going, well, this is from my experience and my perspective and the variables of my life. And if there's some degree of parallel that you see in your life, then maybe some of this advice will help you. And if I could put, Gage, if I put your business out there just a tiny bit, like I remember when you were going to start your podcast and me and you were having these conversations about like, hey, should you go forward and build this whole community? And like, that's huge leadership steps. And there was a lot of risk involved in that, from time and money and all the things in between. And I remember just going, you got this, bro. Like I know you have so much passion for something and your level of connections. And I have no idea how it's panned out. And I'm sure it's going quite well. At least I hope it's going quite well. But it seems like, from the little birds I've heard chirping around that I know in the space that you've been doing some stuff. So good on you, man. I'm proud of you as your friend and your homie.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I guess quick update on that then. Yeah, the podcast, we got to 120 episodes and then decided it was time for a little pause and to get feedback from the community. So I haven't published a new episode in like a month or so while I get survey reactions. And the idea is that once I get, enough survey responses or just run out of time, I'm just going to then kind of decide what to do next with the podcast. But so overall, yeah, I'd say that adventure has been really rewarding and it's a ton of work. It's daunting. I see why most podcasts don't make it past, like, I forget the average, like 7 episodes or something like that is like the average for a lot of podcasts.
Yeah, I think
it was make it past that because it's a lot of work.
I feel like I mentioned this in a previous episode, but it does keep coming up. The idea that I think it might be only 10% or only like 5%. I should really look up the actual statistics of podcasts make it past like their 20th episode or something like that, where after you've hit a threshold, you're basically in like the top percentile of podcasts in existence, which is crazy to me. How it really is just the proof that consistency beats quality 9 out of 10 times. That just you growing over time and evolving, pun intended. It does tend to outpace planning everything up front, making it as best as it possibly can be. And by the time you start, you're already burnt out. You're already, you don't even make it past 5 episodes or something. I feel like
I think they call it pod fade is the word people use, and it's exactly that. It's like burnout. Like you're doing all this work, you're putting it out there, and probably in the beginning you're not getting a ton of downloads, right? So you have to just have the true belief that this is something that's going to help in the world because you have no actual data that anyone cares. So you're just putting it out there. You just got to keep going and keep going and keep going. And I think it is so much work. It doesn't have immediate ROI. So a lot of people say, why am I doing this? Like I'm killing myself to get 5 downloads on a pod, something like that. Like what's the point? But the point is, you have to keep going. Like with anything, you're not going to crush it on day one, typically, unless, you get this right combination of luck and circumstance and whatever, like stars aligned. But most people are going to have to put work in. So, of course, it's maybe an expectation setting. If you go in thinking this has to return, results on my effort here within the first few episodes, then you're going to be disappointed, right? But if you say to yourself, I'm doing this because it's fun, I'm doing it for me, I'm doing it to learn, I'm doing it to just share knowledge, and you know what? The downloads will hopefully come at some point, but that's not the point. I do it for that. You'll keep going.
Absolutely. I have a somewhat tangential topic that I want to touch on that you hit on briefly. But before we get into that, what's your podcast name for everybody?
Evolve CPG, with a bit of a tagline. You can look it up for that if CPG is confusing. It's consumer packaged goods for those who want to know. But Evolve CPG, or you can just look up Brands for a Better World.
Awesome. Oh, cool. And before you go tangent, Ross, I want to throw two things on that. One thought here is, I just think it's hilarious, but it's like 76.5% of all statistics are made up on the spot.
Including out. Yeah.
And a sidebar, I have to give a shout out to my homie Jeremy here. We would not be doing this podcast if it wasn't literally made easy by my buddy Jeremy, who owns rise25.com. They are like the literal easy button for podcasts. All Ross and I do is record this, upload the notes, which is automatically taken, and they put it all out and distribute it, put it everywhere, and the price is really, really affordable. So I just shameless plug for my dude, because I would not be doing this podcast if Ross and I had to do all the work of distribution and editing the videos. And I mean, it's insane. So anyway, all right, that's it.
Absolutely. Hey man, I mean, he deserves a shameless plug at this point.
Yeah, for sure. But I derailed your derailment or your tangential idea. So please continue, Fred.
No, I think it, luckily I still remember it. You touched on a point that people kind of go into it expecting it to either be easy or to give them an immediate return on investment, right? And I think that that's something that the internet and social media has fostered. There's like a level of toxicity to it where you see so many successful people who have done this thing, and the irony is that by the time they're successful, you can no longer see the journey that they took to get here. Right. So all of these people that you view as overnight successes, yeah, I'm, like I said before, lightning hits some people, but the reality of it is most of them have been doing this years, and they're only now crossing your feed when they're successful. And so there's this perception of, oh, well, I'll just do this because I can definitely do what they're doing. They're just chatting in front of a microphone.
Right.
And I can definitely do that. And there's, I think it creates this immediate gut-wrenching feeling when you all of a sudden don't feel as talented as you thought you were, just because you don't have a good perception of what it took for that person to get there, right? Like the length of time it took and the dedication.
It's that social media lifestyle, man. No one's posting all their, their pictures of like when they're beat up and tired and fat and overweight at the vacation, and and like no one, like I don't have anything in my social media feed about 2018 when I was crying at Christmas time because I didn't know how I was going to pay everybody, and I had to take out a loan that I couldn't afford, and it was a crazy 50% interest rate, and I'm losing my mind. I can't even enjoy my holiday because I just
50%.
We're gonna die, But like no one talks about that shit because it's not glamorous and exciting, right? It's not, but that's the truth. And there is no such thing as an overnight success. You get struck by lightning because you're standing tall in a space where you've earned your spot, right? Like that doesn't happen on accident. Like you assembled a team. There's some sort of things that came together that made that happen for you. Just because you just started your business last week doesn't mean you didn't spend 30 years in the industry building relationships and things. There's some backstory behind it that involved a lot of hard work, a lot of strategic placement to be lucky while doing hard work. So that's my
Totally. Like an example in the podcast world is someone I think we all know, Debbie Millman with Design Matters podcast, which in theory was the first design podcast ever. Is something I've heard her say. I haven't looked into whether or not that's true, but I believe Debbie, so it's
I'll
probably.
give it to her.
But she founded that podcast in 2005, and she's still going and going strong, right? So that's almost 20 years, not quite 20 years yet. But I was listening to her on someone else's podcast, on Justin Aaron's podcast, Design of recently. And she was mentioning how even with her, she's had a long track record. She's got 1 billion times the downloads and listeners and followers and subscribers that our, podcasts here have. But even with that, she said, I think it was just a few years ago or something like that, when she got on Tim Ferriss's podcast, that her downloads went through the roof and have kept up at that level since. But so you just keep going, right? And stuff builds over time. You don't know where it's going to go, but if you believe in it and you keep doing it, you'll get somewhere. And then you'll have those, like you said, lightning moments where she was already standing on top of a mountain. A lot of people knew her. We all assume she's killing it. And, in many ways she probably is. But even she had this room to grow and got hit by the Tim Ferriss lightning and then went through the roof. And then who knows what the next thing is, right? So I think it's just a matter of believing that you're heading in the right direction, having the courage to keep going, and having a vision for how you're going to get there, right? That's kind of the summary of what we've been talking about so far with leadership. It's just a combination of those few things. And then maybe you've got slightly better social skills and you're more of a community builder. Or maybe you've got great business acumen and you're a business leader. Maybe you're just a really deep thinker and you're a thought leader. Different ways to lead, of course, but it seems those three things, courage, belief, and vision, are what we've talked about so far as the common thread.
Oh yeah, it is for sure. You said Justin Aaron. What's his podcast?
He has a couple of them. His older podcast, the one that's been running longer, is called Design Of, where he interviews a bunch of design leaders.
Okay.
And then the newer one is called The Creative Shit Show, which is
my vibe.
Collaborative podcast with a few other hosts. They've got 4 hosts on that show. I think it kind of launched at How Design Conference, and then it's kind of blown up since then, and they've kind of continued doing it. But
cool.
For that one, I think it's also focused on design leaders, but they like to, just talk about the shit behind the scenes. I know, like what we're talking about.
Yeah.
You see people's highlight reels on social media, but they wanted to say this is a shit show. Let's talk about how chaotic and crappy and unexpected and whatever else, running a business, running an agency, being a creative, working on projects, all of it can blow up in your face at any given time. So they like to expose some of that stuff.
And speaking of behind the scenes, I think that's another thing that people should sort of seek out more often and also post more often, because I know a lot of creatives who they'll consistently rack their brains and change their formula and do something different because they feel like what they're doing isn't working when they don't get the downloads or the views or the whatever that they want. They don't realize that what they're doing is fine. They haven't put in the level of consistency so that these platforms pick them up, right? Like what you're saying, Gage, sometimes a podcast that's been going on forever still has room to explode when the right person reaches their hand out and promotes them to millions and millions and millions of people. And that it's no surprise that you remain consistent at that subscriber count or that download count, because what you're doing is fine. There's just a degree of, most of the time at least, there's just a degree of consistency that's missing, that a degree of work.
Exposure, yeah.
Focus, consistency, and just time, right? You just need enough stuff out there, enough people to see it for you to get your shot at that lightning rod moment. But to get there, you've got to be consistent and you've got to just
and I think
being patient and show up.
The thing that underpins all of that, that fuels that, is the proper motivation. You really have to give a shit about what you're talking about, what you're doing.
Right.
Because when it's hard, when it's impossible, when the future seems bleak and you seem like you're wasting your time and you keep going anyways, and any normal person would quit, that's when the real shit happens, right? Like that's when it gets deep. And that's when you can do that consistent thing and you can keep showing up till it's your turn to get lucky. And I mean, I've been running this company since 2006. I had no idea what I was doing when I started, like bona fide, no idea. I liked to design. I was an okay designer. And look at me now. I still don't know what I'm doing, but it's working. Like, so I hired people that do know what they're doing. And I'm just up here just being myself. And yeah, it's awesome. It really.
That's part of what I love about business leadership is you just go and you figure it out, right? Like nobody really knows what they're doing because things might all be working this moment, but then a global pandemic hits, or things might be working right now, but then you like scaled your team to double size and now you need completely new management techniques. You need different leadership structure. You need different org charts. You need different processes and systems, right? And it's just every step of the way with running a business is learning basically and trying to make the best decision you can with the info you have, and then be willing to adjust when it was the wrong decision. But you never fully know exactly what you're doing because the world around you is changing, your team is changing, your industry is changing, the business changes, the economy changes, like all those things can change at any given moment. So it's just, if you like solving problems, then start a business because that's basically your job. It's just constantly solve whatever the next most pressing problem is.
So Gage, we're hitting times. So I wanted to ask you one last question before we wrap up. But before then, I want to point everyone again to your website, modernspecies.com, and the Evolve CPG podcast. Is that correct?
Yep.
Awesome. So at the end of our podcast, we like to, give out like a specific recommendation. We like our guests to kind of share the love, so to speak. You've already done quite a bit of that throughout our conversation, but is there any either, best piece of advice or your favorite podcast or even an individual in the industry that you want to shout out today?
Oh yeah, so much pressure, so many things and people to shout out. But the first one that came to mind is Epic Made. Give you all a shout out because, when we were starting out on our podcast journey, y'all helped us crush it with some amazing animations for our YouTube channel. So shout out to you all supporting us there.
Thank you.
And of course, like you were saying, it takes a team to build a podcast. So my podcast would not exist if it wasn't for We Edit Podcast, which is the team who does all the back-end production and kind of distribution of our podcast. And then one of our team members, Andreana Blanco, who kind of manages our social channels and make sure episodes get posted everywhere.
Thank you.
So, I get to do the fun part of interviewing folks, but there's a lot of other people that are behind the scenes actually making sure the podcast gets done and out there like you all. So shout out to you all. And then I guess shout out to, we also talked about briefly the community that we were building. So we have, over 450 members in that community now. Started from 0, still might go to 10x the current size. Who knows where it's going to go, but we're just kind of building it as people show up and seeing what they need. And it evolved into more of a collaborative community, actually. Like it started out as a community for our podcast, but then we had some people that consistently showed up and some people that were kind of collaborators on events. And we just started talking about what would it look like to just build community together instead of having all these separate siloed communities. When we have a lot of overlap, we're all impact driven. So we're actually in the process of evolving our community into impact driven, which will have multiple groups in there. So I guess I'll just give a shout out to Green Marketing Academy, led by Michelle Miller, who was the first other group to jump into our community. She's brought in a couple hundred members, I think, at this point into her space. A lot of which is kind of overlappy with our space. which is great. Shout out to Kate Fossen with Brand Pollinators, who's been a collaborator on lots of things like impact-driven holiday guides that we've published to just try to make sure these better for the world brands get out there into people's shopping carts. And she's building something in our community too. Shout out to Rob Sinclair of Conscious Brands, who's building a B Corp cohort as we speak for the community, so that a group of, let's say, 8 people or something like that who all want to get B Corp certified can go through that process together and make it a little easier and more fun and more affordable for everyone by doing it. Shout out to Jamie Lamond of Kindship Group, who has been kind of a moderator in the community, keeping conversations going, making sure people are being mindful with her Mindful Monday kind of posts. Shout out to Ashley Warbeck of Common Cause Collective, who built a community for that group in the space and continues to help support that community. That's just with these projects that we've been talking about. There's a lot of people out there. I'm just a big believer in collaboration. I think especially if you're a leader, like collaborate with other leaders, because a lot of us are heading in the same direction and trying to accomplish some of the same things and have very complementary skill sets or communities. So instead of going it alone, why don't we go together? So that's part of our kind of tagline of our community is let's go further, faster together. So just want to give a shout out to those people who are going further, faster with us as we try to figure out how we can make the biggest impact possible in the world. So shout out to all those folks. I could keep going with awesome Modern Species clients and friends and other podcasts and stuff, but I don't want this to take up another 30 minutes. So I'll just...
Well,
Good,
that's
really
an awesome group of impactful leaders you got there. We definitely appreciate that. So, and big thank you to AIGA for bringing Gage and I together through their programming. And we wouldn't be homies, And Lenny Gray Morris is a mutual friend of ours that we connected through as well, and there's some really good people out there. So happy to be in the circle of some awesome creative leaders.
Heck yeah. Yeah. Cheers to that.
So we've been talking to Gage, who is the founder of Modern Species and Evolve CPG. If listeners want to follow up with you directly, Gage, where should they go? I assume your podcast for one.
Yeah, I like, back and forth dialogue. Like the podcast, the most frustrating thing about it is you put it out there and then you don't necessarily know who specifically is listening or what they're getting out of it unless they drop you a review. So if you do listen to the podcast, drop a review. But I also just want to connect directly with people. So the platform I'm on the most is either in our community, which you can find at community.evolvecpg.com, which will be changing soon to the impact-driven community, but I'll make sure that URL still forwards. Or on LinkedIn, you can find me at just, at Gage Mitchell, GageMitchell on LinkedIn, where I'm trying to stay somewhat active in that space. And then you can find my contact info there as well.
All right. We'll have some of that information down in the comments as well here on our YouTube video and the likes.
Sweet.
Cool. All right, Gage, thanks for being on the show, brother. And it's so good to see your face and catch up and hear that you're doing well. And we'll hang out again soon. And until next time, everybody, thanks for dialing in. We appreciate you all, and reach out on any of the platforms you are watching this on. We'd love to hear from you. Take it easy.
Bye.
Thanks.
We really hope you enjoyed the show. Please like and subscribe to join us on our next journey through the world of art and business on the Pixel Retentive Podcast.